finished! Finally! It's finished! The interior is finished! Just gotta paint the rest of it now. That's right, it's finally here. Welcome to the Miniatures Apothecary Mastodon Interior video. So, as many of you know, I really like to do my footage very raw. I like to show my mistakes because that's how other people learn, and it's also how we as hobbyists learn. The first part of this video is a massive mistake on my part, because clearly I didn't clean the interior of this Mastodon very well. So when I started putting the paint on, it started separating and pooling together in small areas, and it took a while for me to get the first layer of paint on the walls, which was a nightmare. But we finally did it, which is great. I really enjoyed painting the interior of this monster of a miniature. I've never painted the interior of a vehicle before. It's always been build it, glue the doors shut, prime it, and get on with it. But in this case, in this instance, it's such a large piece, and there's so much detail inside the Mastodon that it kind of makes it worth it. Even though you're never really going to see the interior that much unless you magnetize like the top of the model so it can be taken off and you can see the interior. I'm not going to do that. I don't have the experience with magnets. I also don't have any magnets, so we won't be doing that. But it's done. The interior is finally done, and I want to obviously cover certain parts of the paint job in this video. It was really fun. It was really interesting. I had a lot of help from members of the Discord, which was also a lot of fun. Some techniques that I hadn't thought of using, or some ways of getting a certain amount of detail on the walls, because for the most part inside the Mastodon, a lot of the walls are very flat. There's just no detail on them surfaces. It's just flat and it's there. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been a journey. It's been about 3 weeks, I think, on and off, maybe a little bit longer. But we are finally at that stage where we can show off the progress, and we can show off the finished piece. So I hope you all enjoy. So I went with Thunderhawk Blue for the interior. I wanted to make it sort of two-tone. I knew the bottom section I wanted to keep as metallic, and then I wanted another colour for the actual walls. And I'm kind of regretting using that colour in particular. I kind of wish I'd have gone for something a bit lighter, but it's done now. There's nothing I can do about it. It looks cool. It's kind of dark in there, but I kind of like that. It could have been, if it was a bit brighter, then you'd have probably, light bouncing off the inside when the doors are open and stuff, you'd have been able to see more. But it works, and it looks nice, and I feel like it's the right colour. I then ended up going on to putting a lot of different washes over a variety of different metallic parts. So I used the same Seraphim Sepia and Reikland Flesh shade for certain columns and areas, which gives it the same look as my Iron Warrior shoulder pads, the trim, which I like. I really like that technique, like just to double up on the washers and it changes the colour, and it looks like a really dull, sort of hammered out gold in a way, I guess. So I really liked that. It was nice, and I'm quite happy with it, to be honest. The interior has so much detail in there, particularly when it comes to things like the lights. They were actually a lot of fun to do. I'm not one of these. I'm not one for picking out every light bulb and light source that's going, but I really enjoyed doing it this time. I thought about adding some more. There's a couple of little areas where I think they're supposed to be lights, but I'm not even 100% certain, because everyone's painting them differently, and the pictures on Forge World are slightly different as well. So I just left them as is and just went for the yellows for the main lights, which I think work. The highlighting was okay, a lot of dry brushing, and it came out looking okay. But once it was done, you were left with this very plain interior, as you can see. So I decided that it needs a bit more to it. So after a few discussions with some of the lads on the Discord, I ended up settling on some sponge work, which was mainly just sponging on areas of typhus corrosion. Now, over the Thunderhawk Blue and over the metallic, it gives off a different effect, and the more sort of grit you have with it, the more texture you have, which is really cool. So for certain areas, it came up and it was, especially like on the bottom couple of millimeters, I tried to get as much grit on the sponge as possible, just so it shows like maybe there's been splashes or like mud's been thrown into the actual Mastodon hull itself, and I think it came out looking okay. Across the Thunderhawk Blue, for the most part, it kind of looks just very streaky in a way. It didn't dry as one solid colour, so it's a little bit translucent. You can imagine inside of these things you've got a lot of condensation and a lot of moisture coming off the engines and then the marines that are in there, so it kind of makes to have that condensation sort of look. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I mean, most of you know by this point, I really love using sponges. It's really easy. It's simple, I know. But there's so much you can do with just a piece of foam and a paint. And it showed up really well. It came out looking really well. And over the variety of different colours that are in there, the effects are completely different each time. So that was cool. Now, as you can see from the footage in front of you at the moment, you can see at the top of the Thunderhawk Blue in the dead centre, I ended up with this weird sort of pattern. So I ended up revisiting the panel multiple times with Typhus Corrosion with different size sponges, just to sort of get rid of that pattern that formed from the Typhus Corrosion. It looked really weird, and I weren't quite 100% certain how I managed it. But, you know, it's food for thought for a later project in case I need to make patterns with Typhus Corrosion. Another bit that I added, again came from talking with the members of the Discord, was some streaks of Agrax along with essentially some highlights of a light brown that I've got. And I think it kind of added another depth to the whole used look, worn look, like it's in use, you know, oils and moisture and stuff like that. Originally I just did the Agrax and it didn't look right, and then someone pointed out that you could do a highlighting it with a lighter brown or something like that, so I gave it a try just on one at first. And that's what it's all about when you're painting something this big, especially with an interior this size that you're not really going to see. You can play around a little bit with the interior. You can do little bits, and if you don't like it, either paint over it or you can leave it because it's not really going to get seen. I mean, if you're like me and you know it's there, then you'll want to paint over it. I did paint over the one of them that I didn't like. I repainted it and then revisited with the sponge work, and then tried a different colour, and it came out looking okay. There's definitely a feel of a lot of moisture and oils and like grit that's maybe in the air, like dirt that's been thrown up from the battlefield and has been pulled inside through vents or just the doors opening themselves. So it came out looking okay. I made sure that I did this all over the model as well, so it's not just all over the interior, sorry. So they're not just on the Thunderhawk Blue, but there's parts of it that are on the metallic areas as well. So once I'd finished adding the moisture techniques and the dirt and everything else, you've got what you see before you. I really liked it. It turned out okay. There's probably some things that I could have done better, which, you know, everyone's their own worst critic at the end of the day. But it worked. It looks okay, and for me, it's of a level that, bearing in mind it's not going to get seen once it's on the inside, I'm happy with. Now, straight away from that, I moved on to doing the two interior walls. I used all the same techniques, all the same paints and everything else. They do look they look alright. They'll work for sort of my level of painting at the moment. There's a lot of detail, some of which is still actually, you can still see, which I think is really cool. Like them doors, the front doors on the Mastodon are quite big, and the door on the back is also a sizable one as well. So it's still possible to see some of the interior detail. I probably would have gone with, like I said before, I would probably gone with a lighter colour. I was tempted to go with an even lighter colour for the walls, the two interior walls. where the doors are, but I thought that might be too much of a mix mash of colour, so I stuck with the Thunderhawk blue all the way through. So once the interior walls were done and the single sort of interior wall was done, it was time to move on to the other side and the floor. I went for all the same colours, all the same techniques and everything else. I came across the same problems. Clearly hadn't cleaned off the resin as well as I possibly should have done. So I ended up, with this side, I ended up doing a lot more pot dipping as opposed to watering the paint down. And due to the gap between finishing the first panel and starting on this one, I had the first panel in front of me for reference. If ever any of you are like me and occasionally, excuse me, voice break, if you ever like have long periods of time between painting a miniature and you're trying to get the same effects and paints for each one, make sure you always have a reference in front of you. This panel was slightly different because it comes with a lot more detail, particularly the consoles and stuff. I really enjoy picking out console buttons and screens and things like that. I'm not the best out there to paint them, but I do find them really enjoyable, and you can have a lot of fun with them. You can use different techniques, different paints and stuff if you want it a dull console or a bright one, but we'll get to that later on. In the meantime though, this was no different to the first panel. It was rinse and repeat for a lot. It was, because I'm using a brush and I'm not using an airbrush, it was revisiting a lot of the areas on a regular basis. Used a lot of washers, and you know, it eventually came out looking almost exactly the same with a few minor differences. But those imperfections, those differences between each panel, I actually liked, and they make sense. You can chalk a lot of it up to things like chipping or you know, vents working in different ways, or a piece of the interior being used more than the other side for whatever reason, whether it's being knocked or held onto or scraped or something. So just bear that in mind. Don't always think that everything has to be exactly perfect and exactly uniform, because not everything is exactly uniform. So as with the first half of the Mastodon, getting that Thunderhawk blue one solid colour took a while, and I ended up using it to also do the banding around the metal floor panels. So there's a nice contrast between the metallic and the banding, as well as the walls, and it came out looking really cool. For the flooring though, I ended up adding a very healthy layer of Agrax Earthshade to the metallics, because obviously that's the part that's going to get walked on the most. It's going to get the most use, so you want it to look like it's being used. I also ended up using, when I got around to doing the sponge work for the wall, I ended up using it on the floor as well, but instead of just doing it once over, or maybe revisiting it once or twice, I revisited it several times and I added a lot more to it. So there's this sort of ripple effect where the paint has dried over and over and over again, and it's come out looking really cool. It's quite an interesting effect. I'm not sure whether I'd call it a technique, because it's just sponge work, but it did come out looking really cool, and it kind of gives it that feel that they may have like boot prints and stuff, possibly like where crates have been placed, or weapon butts, or you know, where a dreadnought's been standing or something like that. So it's come out looking quite interesting. It's been fun to do. So after all the grime and moisture and effects and everything else had been put on, just like with the first panel, it was time to move on to the lighting and the consoles. Now these two parts in particular have been quite possibly two of my favourite bits to do from the interior. They're really easy. It was dry brushes, but it's using completely different colours. They're a lot brighter, and it attracts the eye a lot more. So when you've got the whole piece and you look inside it, it does attract your eyes to those areas. And I was really happy with how they turned out, really. For the console, I ended up using a number of different contrast paints, as well as Tesseract green. I really like it. It's a nice vibrant green, and when you combine it with Biltan green or moot green for like your highlights and stuff, it gives off a really nice effect. It's kind of mirrored, there's a nice shine to it, so clearly it's a console, and I was really happy with the outcome. The console itself is very bright. It's definitely one of those things that when you're painting this thing, you are going to be aware of the fact that you're not going to be able to see it on the inside. But knowing that you've done it and knowing that you've done a good job on it kind of counteracts that feeling. I wish there was a way that I could have, I wish that it was maybe designed a little bit differently so that console was a bit further forward in the model so you could see it more. But overall, it turned out really well. It's quite bright, it's colourful, and I was able to play around with some different bits of highlighting and then add some washers to the overall console as well, make it look like it's well used. So once all those little interior details have been picked out, you're pretty much done. I've found that this is very much a labour of love. It's a lot of hard work, but once it's done and you've got the majority of the pieces together, it looks amazing. It's an astounding kit. It's been a lot of fun to paint. I know this isn't a traditional like painting video, it's more of a showcase, showing the progress, showing how I did certain things. And I apologise if I haven't gone into as much detail as I possibly could have done on the paints and sort of what washers I've used for which areas. But if you want to ask me any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment down below and ask away. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the channel. Thank you very much for joining me, and I shall see you all next time.